Hey there, welcome back to another video. This time it is a review of the 1981 horror film Scared to Death. Now, Scared to Death is the directorial debut of director William Malone, who you might recognize as a director of films like the House on Haunted Hill remake, Creature, and some episodes of Masters of Horror, as well as Tales from the Crypt. Now, before William Malone was a filmmaker, he worked at Dawn Post Studios, which is a name that might sound familiar to you because in the 80s it was one of the largest mask making studios out there. It was featured in Halloween 3 Season of the Witch. I believe there was even some shots of the factory that was featured in that particular film. I could be wrong, but I do know that the work of Dawn Post Studios was featured in the film with the various different masks that were used in the movie, with the skull and the witch and the pumpkin head and so on and so forth. Well, William Malone was a pretty big part of that company, of that studio, for many, many years. And one day he decided in the late 70s that he wanted to make a movie. I think he had done some short films before this on his own free time, but he decided he wanted to do something bigger, something potentially better. So he took a risk and he sold his car and most of his belongings to raise some collateral and to get a budget together to make this movie. He raised, I think it was a budget of $74,000, which is not very much money. And he spent 3 months working on the monster suit that would be used in the film. And he saved some money doing that because instead of paying some other makeup effects artist or some other studio to do the work, he did it himself. And he definitely had the experience because he was a really big admirer of different makeup effects artists like Dick Smith and some of the other effects artists, and much like a lot of the other makeup effects guys around the time like Rick Baker and Rob Bottin, William Malone was in that particular realm. He really just loved makeup effects, loved monsters, and he wound up making his own monsters and worked with Dawn Post Studios. And so he decided, all right, I'm going to make a monster movie. I'm going to make my own monster movie. Another reason why he decided to make a monster movie is because it was something that he felt that he could do cheaper than another particular kind of film. And it was definitely something that he was passionate about as well because he really enjoyed monsters. So he wanted to sink his teeth into his vision or his concept of a monster movie. And for a first time director, I thought his direction in this was very impressive. You could tell just from this film alone that William was a genuine talent behind the camera. He not only knew his way around the camera, he knew how to utilize the camera in ways that enhanced sequences, that created some really nice mood and atmosphere, heightened the tension, and obscured the monster in some ways so he doesn't give it away right away. I think that was done on purpose. He didn't want the monster to always be in bright lights and realize that it's just a guy in a suit for the majority of the running time. He had quick flashes, he had artistic choices like using different camera angles to obscure the monster, or foggy windows, or in some other instances, shadows on the wall. And once the monster is revealed, it's equally as effective, and it actually is more effective because of the build up to the reveal. And it's a great looking monsters design. I think William Malone did a fantastic job with the makeup effects. It's a great looking monster. And that's something that a monster movie needs. You know, if you're going to have a decent monster movie, you need to have, at the very least, a good monster. And William Malone definitely did provide that with this film. Now, there are some instances, though, with this direction that you can tell it's a first time director. So there are some moments that come across a little flat. But I give him a pass because he's a first time director and he's trying to work the kinks out and so on and so forth. But even then, there aren't really that many moments where it's particularly flat in terms of his direction. I felt a lot of the stalk and slash scenes were really well shot, especially the one in a car. It reminded me of John Carpenter's Halloween and the scene where the one girl gets strangled in the car. Similar sort of vibe and an approach to that particular kill in Scared to Death. Um, I really like the way that he shot in the sewers, which, by the way, were a set, which still blows me away because it looks so authentic. The sewers in this film looks like the real deal, but they were sets that were built in a yacht warehouse, of all things. So there's a lot of ingenuity that's going on in this low budget film that trumps films that had even bigger budgets around this particular time period. Now, William Malone also wrote the screenplay along with Robert Short, who I believe is another effects artist who worked on other things like the Flash TV series in 1990. I think he also worked on Beetlejuice. So they lent their talents to the screenplay, and it's a mixed bag. I think the explanation for the monster isn't really fleshed out. You don't really know why the professor or the scientist went through all this trouble to create this monster. It's a good acronym for the monster, Sinjanor. Definitely shows a lot of creativity there with the acronym for the monster, which stands for synthesized genetic organism. But I just feel the screenplay, when it deals with stalk and slash bits where the monster's stalking potential victims and killing them, it's good monster fun. When it deals with sequences with the two lead characters and the two that are the main focus of the film, Ted and Jennifer, played by John Stinson and Diana Davidson, it is effective because those characters are well written and they have a good amount of things to do. But when the film goes away from Jennifer and goes to Sherry instead, it's not as effective because the character isn't as fleshed out. The character just seems like she's just there to deliver exposition, and she's a scientist. She knows the truth about the monster and so on and so forth, and that's really her main focus. And it's just not really as compelling or as fun to watch as the back and forth and the genuine chemistry that's displayed with the characters of Ted and Jennifer. And also, it takes itself a little bit more seriously in the second half versus in the first half. It's more tongue in cheek. I mean, you got characters like Tyndall, played by Mike Muscat, which he almost steals the entire movie. This character is a laugh riot. I love this character. I wish he didn't die. I wish there was more of this Tyndall character because he's just a blast. Oh, when you need something done, better call Tyndall. Call Tyndall. And it's just a riot. It's just a hoot. And he's going into the sewer and he's like, let me show you how to screw. It's just the kind of character that you don't see as much of nowadays in these horror movies. A lot of people consider to be cannon fodder, and they really are. But despite the fact that they're disposable characters, they still leave an impact because they're so much fun to watch because of their personality and their genuine charisma. I doubt that William Malone told him to say Tyndall that way. You know, better call Tyndall. Uh, and what he says afterwards just makes me think of this. Like, what if instead of, he said better call Tyndall, he said better call Tinder. Let me show you how to screw. I'm bad. I'm bad. I'm sorry. But but yeah, it's got this really tongue-in-cheek vibe in the first half. I mean, yes, there's people getting stalked and killed by this monster, but it's handled in a way which isn't completely 100% serious. And although there are some moments that are still actually suspenseful and provide some genuine eerie moments, despite that, the second half takes things a little bit more seriously, despite the fact that there are still some quips from our lead and Ted, but it just isn't as balanced. It isn't as well structured as the first half. And then you have stuff like the ending, which is really frustrating. I don't know why they decided to go this route with the character of Jennifer. She's a likable character. You want her to be okay, and by the end of the movie, for some reason, it just portrays her as being fucking crazy, or like that's it. Like she's just, I don't understand why they took that approach. Why the screenwriters decided to take the approach of this character just being a lost cause. I don't get it, because this character is likable and definitely has more going for her than the scientist gal and Sherry, and she doesn't deserve that ending anyway. So it just comes across as a completely unnecessary, uh, dark ending, which William tends. It kind of seems like he's kind of a guy who likes those kind of things, and I think in some ways it definitely does work. But I mean, look at Fear.com, Parasomnia. All of these are all films that have endings that kind of hurt the film because of um, how shocking they're attempting to be, or they're just there to be just pure shock value, and they don't really have anything uh, other than that to really grip or grab an audience. That being said, there were some stuff in the climax that I did like. I like the fact that it takes place in this I think it's a steel mill of some kind. I don't think it's actually a steel mill, but it's actually in a laboratory. But I don't actually think it's the lab, though. I think it's like some kind of mill, and there's a crushing machine and whatever, and they lure the monster into the crushing machine and they crush it. Now you don't actually see the monster get smashed, and I think the reason why is budget, but it's the idea is enough, and I like the climax. I like the setting, and I think it's fairly well shot and well put together. So are all the other sequences that take place in the sewers. It does start off a little weird though, especially with the character of Ted. Your introduction to Ted is not really the best first impression. He comes across as kind of a obnoxious asshole to Jennifer, and you're just like, what a dick. But once you get to know him, he has a certain charm about him. So starts off on the wrong foot, but even despite that particular approach, I still feel that there's still merits to that, because he's funny. Like, he's genuinely endearing, despite the fact that he's being kind of a dick. At least he has a personality. At least he isn't a total block of wood. So that's something that I definitely feel is a net positive, for sure. Now, what's interesting about that character, and I might have mentioned this already, but it bears repeating if I haven't. John Stinson was not the original choice to play this role of Ted. It was actually Rick Springfield. Yes, the singer and actor Rick Springfield. He was actually cast to play the role, But because of scheduling conflicts with his acting classes, he decided not to do it. So that's why William Malone went in and he got John Stinson. And, well, on one hand, it would have been kind of fun to see Rick Springfield in this kind of monster movie. I'm glad John Stinson got the role because he seems like an actor that really hasn't gotten a lot of work. And he's also the kind of actor that you rarely see nowadays be the lead. And it was just refreshing to see a regular guy be the lead in a film like this. And he was just kind of a down on his luck writer too. So it was a nice change of pace in terms of character portrayals. Um, so yeah, ultimately I like John Stinson. I thought he did a good job. Diana Davidson I also thought did a good job as Jennifer Stanton. I felt that she had a good amount of chemistry with John, and the two really did hit it off. That's what made what happened to her character even more frustrating to me and disappointing. It's one of the main reasons why this film isn't anything other than average or adequate for me, because of the ending, because of some other aspects. Definitely because of the second half, which also is not as strong as the first. David Moses plays Detective Lou Capel, who is a former friend and colleague of John Stinson's character Ted, because Ted used to work at the police department, and he retired for reasons. And he's fine. He has a scene. He has a particular scene with Ted that I thought was well done, but he's kind of inconsistent. There are times where his performance is good, but there's other times where it's a little flat. Toni Jannotta I didn't care for as Sherry Carpenter. She came across as a lesser talented, lesser able version of the character of Jennifer Stanton, played by Diana Davidson. I almost felt that it was Diana Davidson in a wig, just lowering her personality a little bit and just trying to be a little bit more robotic. But that's not really the case. It's a completely different actress. She didn't have nearly as much chemistry with the lead, and I felt her performance was rather stilted, to say the least. And I don't know why she was made a big part of the climax. She didn't really earn it. And I get it. She's there for exposition. Well, you can still have her be there for exposition. Have her be there to talk about Sinjanor and all of that. And that's fine. But you didn't need to have her replace the other lead. Like, that was not necessary at all. And then you also have some other actors and actresses like Walker Edmiston, if I can even say the fucking name, Walker Edmiston. It's an easy name, but I'm thinking it's Edmiston, but it's Edmiston. So that's what threw me off. You got Pamela Bauman, Mike Muscat, but that's really the main cast. It doesn't really have a lot of cast members. There's a lot of people who have bit roles and bit stuff to do, but the bulk of the film and the actions in the film go to John Stinson, Diana Davidson, David Moses, and Toni Jannotta. Now, the film, apparently, it was shot in February of 1979. That's when, and it lasted for a total 4 weeks. It got a release at a film festival in 1980, but it didn't come out in the U.S. until a year later. That's why I'm calling it a 1981 film instead of a 1980 film like other sources do. That's something that really is kind of a nitpick for me, but something that it really does bug me, that films are considered to have a release date of when it came out in some film festival once a year before the initial theatrical release. I don't understand why these sources count the release date as being when it aired once at a film festival. I don't understand that. I get it. It is technically the first time it was released in a theater, but it wasn't the wide theatrical release which most people go by when they're talking about films. But that's just my personal opinion on it. It's about 93 minutes, and it has some pacing problems after the first half when Jennifer is taken out of the film, but picks up a little bit near the end. It's got some nice bits of blood and a little bit of gore, not a whole lot of it because it's a lower budget, but there are some nice bloody bits in the film regardless, and it is well shot and it's well directed. The cinematography by Patrick Prince I also thought was really well done, especially the sequences that take place in the sewer or at night or in the parking garage with the sequence with all the roller skaters. I felt the roller skater scene was a little bit of a letdown, though. I was expecting some grand moment where somebody is rolling on roller blades or roller skates, and the monster grabs them and cuts their head off, and then the headless body is just rolling. But I knew that probably wasn't going to happen because of the budget, but it still would have been nice to see. The score by Thomas Chase and Del Hawk, it's there. It's nothing particularly amazing, but it's all right. One thing that also is a detriment to this film and definitely brings the film down a little bit for me is the editing. I do not think the editing in this movie is very well done by Warren Chadwick. I don't know if this is a first time job by him or what, but there's a lot of scenes in this film that look very choppy in terms of the editing. Uh, People will be talking and then it'll have this really abrupt cut, or you'll have one scene and then there'll be a really abrupt cut as if somebody took a butcher knife and just smacked the film with it. It's just not a very evenly edited film, and that definitely does make the movie feel even more of a low budget affair, and makes it pretty obvious that it's a $74,000 film. Also, the sound mix is not really the best either. But hey, I mean, it's a low budget. It's a low budget project, so I'm not gonna hold it against it that much. Honestly, I would recommend checking this film out if you like the trailer, if you like monster movies like Chud or Q the Winged Serpent, or it's not really on the same level as those films, but it's still an average, adequate, semi-enjoyable monster movie with some slasher elements. It's not particularly that scary though. It doesn't really live up to the title Scared to Death, because it's not one of those films that's really going to scare you to death by any means. But it does have its fair share of moments that are a little eerie, a little creepy. It's a genuinely good-looking monster, and in all honesty, it deserves a Blu-ray release or something better than what has been released at this point. You have a VHS by Media Home Entertainment, which apparently there's a different scene that was on a TV cut of the film, which has another scene where there's a victim that's hung upside down, similar to something you would see in John Carpenter's Halloween, that's not featured in the cut of the film that's readily available on video. So the only way to check this out is either through the Media Home Entertainment VHS or through a Retro Media DVD release, which has been out of print for years, with some really shitty looking cover art, and they have Scared to Death as the title, but then they have to put in parentheses so Sinjanor, which I don't understand why they have to do that. I guess because more people are familiar with the film Sinjanor, which is interesting because I saw Sinjanor before I saw Scared to Death. I didn't even know Scared to Death was even a thing until fairly recently. And then I realized, oh, it's got the same monster as Sinjanor. But anyway, other than that DVD, you can't really see it in terms of physical media, but it is on Tubi. So, and I think the Tubi version seems to have a little bit of a better cut or copy of the film than the DVD rip that I've been seeing, but I could be wrong. It could be the same one. Either way, it'd be nice to see it restored and have a release from a company like Vinegar Syndrome. They would be prime candidates for Scared to Death. And it also would be nice to see William Malone do a commentary track, considering it's his first film, and interviews and so on and so forth, because I can see this being a little bit of a cult film for some people, and I don't think it deserves to be completely lost in the sewers, because it's not that bad of a film. It's a average at best monster movie, but that's better than a whole slew of other low budget monster movies that are just absolutely abhorrent. So it's not on that particular level of shit. It's not even on a level of shit. It's a decent, fairly enjoyable, fairly fun monster movie from a passionate filmmaker and lover of monsters in William Malone. And it does feature a genuinely good looking monster. So it's definitely worth watching in that regard. As well as a few others, too. But anyway, thank you for watching my review of Scared to Death. And as always, I'll see you later. See ya.